The alarm over household debt in Canada is ringing louder than ever. A new report says levels have hit yet another new record high, and they'll reach another record by the end of this year. That's setting Canadians up for a potential debt crisis when interest rates inevitably go up. Canadians have taken advantage of cheap borrowing for years now. So for the first time, the country's budget watchdog decided to look at just how deep of a hole we've dug for ourselves. It found we are more indebted than any other G7 country. The Parliamentary Budget Office, or PBO, estimates the debt-to-income ratio reached 171% in 2015. That means for every $100 Canadians make, they on average owe $171. The report anticipates that ratio will hit 174% by the end of this year. That's far higher than the last estimate we heard of 164% from Statistics Canada. But Stats Can factors pension entitlements into what Canadians earn. According to the PBO, that shouldn't be included because it isn't cash households can use. To understand how at risk Canadians are, the PBO looked at the Bank of Canada's overnight lending rate. It anticipates that will rise from the current 0.5% to 3.5% by 2020. The PBO used that projection to consider the debt service ratio. In other words, how much of a person's income is needed to service debt payments. With interest rates going up, that ratio is expected to hit 15.9% in 2020. That's a full percentage point above its highest level in the past 25 years. Based on this, the financial vulnerability of the average household would rise to levels beyond historical experience. Tomorrow, the Bank of Canada could make debt even more enticing. It will choose to either raise, hold, or cut rates. Bloomberg follows the predictions of 34 economists. 19 of them expect the bank to keep the benchmark at 0.5%. 15 expect the bank to cut to 0.25%. None are expecting a rate hike, which means borrowing is going to stay cheap or maybe even get even cheaper. Mustafa Askari is the Assistant Parliamentary Budget Officer. So now you, of course, put together this report that we're talking about, and one of the things we're pointing out is that you used a different way to measure this debt to income than what Statistics Canada has always used. Can you explain it just a little bit more about why you decided to do that?
Yes, I mean, as you mentioned in your introduction, the difference is that the pension adjustment to disposable income. And what the Statistics Canada has done is included the pension entitlement of households as part of the disposable income, which conceptually is probably true, but in terms of the mortgages and debt payment, what you require is something cash that is in the hands of the households that they can use. And so we believe that the concept of the just disposable income without that adjustment is a more appropriate one. And when you use that, the number is the ratio is slightly higher than what the Statistics Canada is showing. But the bottom line is that the trend for this ratio is on the upside. It is going up. I mean, beyond 2016, it is going to come down a little bit back to close to the current level, but it's still higher than what it has been over the history, and so that's one ratio that we have looked at. But we have also looked at the debt service ratio, which is, in our view, is a more appropriate measure of the household's ability to service their debt, and that ratio is going to go up based on our predictions to something close to 16%. And that's above the average, historical average.
But the way you calculated that, your projection is, as we were describing, you anticipate the interest rate could go from 0.5% all the way up to 3.5% within 4 years. Now, we know how long these rates have been rock bottom. I mean, for the Bank of Canada to increase that rate that much in that short a time, we'd have to have a major turnaround in Canada's economy. Isn't that the case?
Well, of course. I mean,
is that going to happen, though?
Well, the rate increase is conditional on the economy performing much better than it has in the past couple of years. And our projection that we did in the fall of last year was that by But by 2017, you're gradually going back to a normal sort of the operation, and the interest rate will continue to rise to their sort of the normal level by the end of the projection period, which is 2020. So if things do not change drastically from the current trend, yes, then you will see a rise in interest rate. If things worsen and the economic situation worsens, then sure, the interest rate will not go up, and then you won't have this impact on household debt service ratio.
But even so, I mean, as you're pointing out, the trend is pretty stunning, and this detail you've included in your report that we have the highest debt ratio in the G7. Why is that? I mean, what is it that's going on in Canada? Other countries have had very low interest rates as well.
Yes, we show that, but we also have to be careful in interpreting those numbers. For example, relative to the United States, we have a higher debt service ratio, but the disposable income in the United States also, it has to cover healthcare costs. For example, in Canada, healthcare costs have already been paid for through taxes, so you have already deducted that. So one has to be careful in comparing these numbers sometimes, because if, for example, if you consider the case where the U.S. had a public healthcare system, their disposable income would have been much lower because their taxes would have been higher, and so that ratio would have gone up. So it is. One has to take into account those kind of issues. But
so maybe we're not the craziest spenders in the world. Just quickly, we're almost out of time. Is there something that you think the government should be doing to discourage all this borrowing?
Well, I mean, it's not really. I mean, we are not really making any policy recommendation. It is just giving a sort of a warning to the policymakers and decision makers that there is this trend, and if the economy improves over time, interest rates go back up, we are going to see an increase in debt service ratio. And what happens is that that's part of your disposable income. So if you have to spend that much money on servicing your debt, you have less money for other things that you need to spend on. So there's an issue. I don't think it's a crisis, but there is an issue.
Right, and we'll see what happens tomorrow if the rates are going to go even lower. That will be something to see. All right, thank you so much for being with us.
It's my pleasure.